Okay, we're in the middle of discussing the laws of saying Kaddish and who gets precedent over saying Kaddish over who. And so today we're going to finish hopefully the chapter, and we're going to sort of skip around a little bit to say things which are more interesting or relevant. As we saw already, a lot of the things in this chapter are not so relevant nowadays. Okay, if there are two more, so over here we skipped a little bit, but it talks about the sort of who has more rights in the Shiva, in the Shloshim, in the yard site, all different scenarios. And then it says if there are two mourners with equal rights, they should draw lots. And if one wins the right to recite the Kaddish, right, to draw lots. So this is everybody's fighting to have. I want the opportunity to say Kaddish. So the only way to adjudicate is if we have drawing lots. Now, if one of them wins the rights to recite Kaddish at Ma'ariv service, then the other is entitled accordingly to say an extra Kaddish at Shachar service without drawing lots, right? Because there's only one Kaddish for the mourners to say at Ma'ariv. So we have Reuven and Shimon. Reuven wins the lot to say at Ma'ariv. So now when it comes to Shachris, the first one goes to Shimon, and then afterwards they split it equally. And then for the third Kaddish, they should again draw lots. Likewise, if there are many mourners, lots should be drawn, and the one who wins does not participate in any subsequent lots until all the mourners have said Kaddish. So the lot isn't really, the lot can be to see who gets a chance to say Kaddish, or who gets a chance to daven for the Amud, or other things like we discussed last week. But the lot could also be anybody. It could be there's enough Kaddishim to go around for everybody. And the lot is just going to determine in which order it's going to go. So once you've had your chance, once you've won the raffle, so to speak, then you continue. Then you're out of the game until everybody's had a chance. Okay, now here this is very important. We once had actually not so long ago, somebody came to Beis Menachem, and he had yard site, and there was somebody else who was davening there who was an Aval who was davening there for the Amud every day. It was a couple of years ago. So the person who had the yard site said, what do you mean? Like, I have yard site, I come first, the yard site comes before. But it's not so true, because there is, Sif Ches 8 introduces us to, there's a difference between a member and a visitor. Now again, this is in the Alta Haim, so probably there was only one shul in each town. And so we're going to talk here about somebody who lives in the town versus somebody who's visiting the town. But I think the argument can be made that the same applies to somebody who frequents another shul. Somebody who's frequent at another shul and just for whatever reason randomly shows up in a different shul that day. So then even though you live locally, you're not a member of this shul, so you get treated like a guest. Let's see what it says. A resident mourner takes precedence over a visitor if it's not during Shiva, right? We already said earlier in number 2, during Shiva, whether the mourner is a minor adult, a resident, or a visitor, right? So then he's entitled to all the Kaddish. So now we're saying, okay, if you're not in Shiva, so then always a resident gets precedence. Now, what about regarding a resident and a visitor who are observing yard site? The visitor has no rights whatsoever. So there's two people who have yard site. One is a visitor and one is a local, a resident. The visitor gets nothing. If there is a resident observing Shloshim or a resident observing the year of mourning, and there is a visitor observing yard site, the visitor is entitled to one Kaddish, right? So most of the Kaddishim. So here, on the one hand, the visitor has a higher level of obligation to say Kaddish because he's a yard site. On the other hand, he's only a visitor. The resident, who has more rights because he's a resident, has less rights because he's during the 30 days of the rest of the year. And so the answer is that still the resident takes precedent, and we give a little finger to the visitor who has yard site. We give him one Kaddish. Now, it doesn't tell us what to do if the question is not about saying Kaddish, if the question is about davening for the Amud. There's only one person could daven for the Amud. So it would seem to be suggesting that the resident, even if he's the resident in the middle of the year, and the visitor shows up and says, I have yard site, well, I'm sorry, you're a visitor, and you don't have the rights over here. If there is a resident observing yard site and another resident observing Shloshim, and a visitor observing yahrzeit, the visitor also says one Kaddish, and the resident observing yahrzeit cannot say to the visitor, I have present. The visitor can say, I did not take this Kaddish from you, but from one observing Shleishim. The resident observing yahrzeit says the first Kaddish, the visitor yahrzeit, second Kaddish, and the one observing Shleishim, the third Kaddish. Okay, so what this is saying is, and this comes up a number of times in this simon, it's an interesting sort of mathematical equation almost. You have three people, A, B, and C. That's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now, Reuven has rights over has more rights than Shimon, but no more rights than Levi. Sorry, Reuven has more rights than Levi, more rights, sorry again. Reuven has more rights than Shimon, but he has to give something. He doesn't have such strong rights in regards to Levi. Levi has more rights over Shimon than Reuven. So it's a little bit hard to see it without visually, but let me just explain it like this. Reuven is a resident and he has yahrzeit. So he's got both on the top of the game. He's a resident, so he's got strong precedence. And he's also yahrzeit, so he's double strong precedence. Then you have two other people. One of the other people also has yahrzeit, but he's a visitor. And the other person is a resident, but he's only shleishim. So Reuven doesn't have to give, so the resident yahrzeit doesn't have to give anything to the visitor yahrzeit. But he does have to give one Kaddish to the resident shleishim. Now, once the resident shleishim has one, the visitor yahrzeit could say, okay, well, now I have rights over you. So it works out, everybody sort of, the Kaddish gets passed around virtually from one to the other, with each one, as soon as it goes from Reuven to Shimon, and Levi says, I have it. Once Levi gets it, Reuven says to Levi, I get it back. So that will never sort of settle. And so the answer is everybody gets one and they have to share it equally. All right. Let's skip to 12. Okay, what does it mean? What's considered a resident? So a resident in regard to this is considered anyone with a permanent residence in the community, even though he pays no taxes to the Kehillah. Right? There used to be, in other words, nowadays that's probably what we call membership, right? So if he lives here, even though he doesn't pay membership, he's considered a resident, or he pays membership. Yeah, pays. In Europe they still have this today. You have the Gemeinde that takes taxes from the Jews for the community. Yeah, he pays taxes, he pays membership to Kehillah, even though he does not reside here. Now again, I'm suggesting tentatively that the same would apply to a shul. So if somebody davens in my shul, even though he doesn't pay membership, he would be considered a resident. And similarly, if somebody never davens in the shul and he might even live out of state, but he pays membership, then he's also considered a resident. And when he happens to be visiting, he gets resident rights. If someone comes from a different community to say Kaddish after his father and mother who resided in the community, even though they were residents. Nevertheless, since the son does not reside there, nor does not pay taxes, he's not considered a resident, right? So if a person's father passed away and he came to town because that's where his parents lived, nevertheless, the child is not considered a resident. If you don't live here and you don't pay membership, you're not a resident, even though you're saying Kaddish for your father who was a member. Now, what if I'm a resident and I have a person, okay, let's skip the rest of Sif Yud Beis. Let's go to 13. One who prays at a synagogue or at a certain Beis Medrash regularly, who now comes to say Kaddish at another synagogue, the mourners there may prevent him from saying it, even if he is in Shiva period, right? So his status is less than that of a visitor, because a visitor has no other place to pray and say Kaddish while this person has, right? So there you go. He's sort of confirming what I've said, kind of, that as somebody who frequents another shul here in town, he gets even less rights than a visitor, because a visitor who's coming to town, he's in the middle of Shiva, he has yahrzeit. If I'm not going to let him say Kaddish, he's going to be kaput. He's not going to have any Kaddish to say. Here, you frequent another shul, so go to your other shul. Then you have another option to go and say Kaddish. A mourner who is capable. Oh, A mourner who is capable and worthy to act as the chazan should do so, since this is of greater benefit to the soul of the deceased than saying the mourner's kaddish, which was originally instituted only for minors. So it used to be that if somebody had a parent lost, it was mourning or yahrzeit, he would daven for the amid, and then they said, "Oh, what about if you can't daven for the amid because you're under bar mitzvah?" So they said, "Okay, instead of the chazan saying those certain kaddishim, we'll let the children say it." And then that over time evolved into people who were not comfortable or able, for whatever reason, to daven for the amid. So they started saying those kaddishim, which were originally designed for the children to say. And if a mourner is unable to lead the entire service, he should begin to lead the part of the service from Ashri Avotzi and whatever he's able to do. One second. Yeah. The mourner who is first in line for saying Kaddish, for example, one who is in Shiva or Shloshim, is also the first in line with respect to acting as the Chazan. It is customary that a mourner does not lead the services on Shabbos and Yom Tov. However, if before, right, so customary that a mourner does not lead the services on Shabbos and Yom Tov. There's different minhagim in exactly how to do this. The Chabad custom is that any day when there's Musaf, an Oval does not daven for the Amid, so Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh. But he does daven for the Amid on Purim, and he does daven for the Amid on Chanukah, even though on Chanukah he'll step aside and allow somebody else to lead the service just for Hallel. However, if before becoming a mourner he was accustomed to lead the service on Shabbos and Yom Tov, he may do so also during the mourning period, and that's because it would be I believe the main reason is because it would be considered a public display of mourning. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, it is forbidden to publicly display any expressions of mourning. That's why, for example, even during the week of Shiva, we on Shabbos of the Shiva, he comes to shul and he sits in a regular chair, regular clothes, regular shoes. So here, if a person, and we're going to have this, for example, right now, Bafaras and Beis Menachem. So for many years, Mendel Moskowitz has been leading the services on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, right? So now this year he's an Oval. So you would say, okay, so he shouldn't lead the services on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur because a mourner doesn't daven on Shabbos Yom Tov. If he were to do that, that would constitute a public display of mourning on Yom Tov, and that's forbidden, and that's why we tell him to do so. I once actually saw a story that somebody had an interesting halachic dilemma. His father passed away, and many years ago, and then a few years later, his mother passed away, and the yahrzeit of his father fell on the Shabbos that he was sitting Shiva for his mother. So what's he supposed to do? On the one hand, it's his father's yahrzeit, and he wants to daven for the Amid. On the other hand, he's sitting Shiva for his mother. And during Shiva, you don't daven for the Amid. So the Rabbi told him he should make a minyan in his house, even though usually on the Shabbos of Shiva, you might go to shul, but okay, you invite a minyan to your house, so it's a small, intimate crowd. And you let everybody who's in the room know that today's your father's yahrzeit. Once everybody knows that today's your father's yahrzeit, if you don't daven for the Amid, if you abstain from davening for the Amid, that would be a public display of mourning, and so therefore you'll be allowed to daven for the Amid. Get that? Okay, any questions before we continue?
Yeah, I have a question. When you're talking shacharit here, of course, because you have multiple kaddishes, but are you ever talking about the two kaddishes before Pazukei de Zimra here, or are you only talking about the kaddish, at the end?
He does talk about both. I think it could be in the part that we skipped. Definitely other poskim talk about both. Again, that aspect of this chapter isn't really relevant nowadays, because nowadays we're going to see in a moment the minhag is that multiple people say kaddish together.
Right.
So that doesn't. But the two kaddishes you're talking about, Nusach Ashkenaz you have two kaddishim before Pesukei de Zimra. So one of them is a kaddish Yosem, one is a kaddish D'Rabbanan. So the Kaddish Rabbanon, there is a little bit of a different status, but it's a little bit beyond the scope to go into all the differences right now.
Okay.
Okay, 16.
Excuse me. What when it comes to the terms of the visitor and the resident, does this also apply to giving an aliyah to a visitor, the same status, or is this specific?
Yes, absolutely. Again, if there's enough to go around, we're happy to accommodate for the visitor, and we'll see in the end of the simon that there's he talks about the virtue of sort of being mevater, of allowing somebody else to get something more than and to forego on your rights, and how that's an even greater benefit to the neshama of your deceased parent. But here we're talking here about rights. Who has the rights to what? And I find this very. I mean, you still see this in some places that people get all huffery about my rights, and I get the aliyah, and you get the aliyah, and I get the kaddish, and you get it. I daven for them, and then you daven for them, and then people take this stuff very seriously. And and there's really, I mean, when we're skipping, we're not going through all the details over here, but there's a lot of details, and other parts can talk even more details. And if people don't agree, then you have to make a lot and draw lots, and it's like really people taking it seriously. So yes, the same is true with aliyahs. If a person there's different people want aliyahs, you have a yard site, you have a birthday, different things. So if there's limited number of aliyahs to go around, then absolutely precedence should be given to a person who is local, either local because he lives locally and he frequents this shul, or local that he pays membership.
Because I've seen a custom when I was in Los Angeles with the Cunans at the headquarters in Los Angeles. They would very often give the aliyah to visitors specifically when they come through.
No, absolutely. I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying the question. No, absolutely. It's very nice to get. I'm sorry. I took something for granted, which was not what you said. Sorry. There's two scenarios. One scenario is where you have people asking for aliyahs. I want an aliyah because I have a yard site. I want an aliyah because I have a birthday. I want an right. So then, let's say it's a Monday morning and there's 3 aliyahs to go around, or it's a Shabbos morning and there's 7 or 8 aliyahs to go around, and you have 10 people who have a yard site this week. So 10 people who want an aliyah. So the people who are locals are going to get precedent. If there's no what we call chiyuvim, if there's no demand for the aliyahs, there's no people who have a yard site or a birthday who are quote unquote obligated to get an aliyah. So then absolutely, it's a very nice thing to do, to give visitors an aliyah, and you make them feel welcome and you honor them. That's absolutely, and we also do that. Yeah, most shuls do that. If you have spare aliyahs to go around, then it's a very nice thing to give them to visitors.
So as long as there's no obligation, as long as there's no local obligation, you give it to the visitor. Yeah. Right. Like the yard site or something.
So, for example, it's that we said in the beginning of the chapter last week, many have this custom that during the year of Avelis to get maftir. So there are people, I know people who during the whole 12 months or 11 months of the saying Kaddish, they try to get maftir. They have to recite the Haftorah every Shabbos. So what happens if somebody comes to shul and he's here every week and he's saying Haftorah every week, and then you have a guy who's coming from out of town because his whole family is getting together in honor of his mother's yard site, and he wants to say maftir for the Shabbos before his mother's yard site, right? So a local, okay, here there's difference because here's a yard site and here's an oval, so we have to sort of get into the whole hierarchy over here and go through all the details and see who overrides who. But certainly the fact that the other person is a resident, is a local, gives him some degree of precedence. And then we might ask him, would you, out of the kindness of your heart, forego on your right to have maftir and allow our visitor to take it? But that's if there's, like I said, that's if there's demands for it, if there's chiyuvim, obligations to get aliyahs. In absence of that, absolutely, it's very nice to give give the aliyahs to the visitors. Okay, a person who is in mourning for both his father and his mother is not entitled to any more rights with regard to leading in prayer or the Kaddish than any other mourner, because one remembrance suffices to both. So actually at our shul in Beis Menachem, till a few weeks ago, Andrew Glatz, he's still saying Kaddish for his mother, but until a few weeks ago, he was saying Kaddish for both of his parents, who passed away a couple of months apart from each other. So no more rights. Now this becomes very relevant. Sometimes you have a person who's saying Kaddish for a parent, and somebody will ask him, oh, today, do you mind to have in mind so-and-so for Kaddish? So often you see people saying, no, I don't want to mix with when I'm saying Kaddish for a parent, I don't want to mix. When I'm finished saying Kaddish for the parent, I'm happy to volunteer to say Kaddish for somebody who doesn't have own say Kaddish. But during the time that I'm saying for my parent, I want it to be pure only for my parent. I've seen a lot of people do that. This sif would seem to imply otherwise. This sif seems to imply one remembrance suffices for both parents. And if it suffices for both parents, it could suffice for a parent and for somebody else also. It's not like the Kaddish only works, so to speak, for one neshama. Okay, whatever the case is. Okay. 17. It is customary to say Kaddish for no more than 11 months. Why? In order not to make the parents appear as grave sinners. For grave sinners are sentenced to a period of 12 months. And therefore, just to demonstrate that we don't consider our parent to be a grave sinner, we cut it short and we stop saying Kaddish after the 11th month. For example, if the death occurred on the 10th of Shvat, the mourner stopped saying Kaddish on the 9th of Teves. On the 10th of Teves, he should not say Kaddish, which is the first day of the 12th month. And we have a rule that one day of the month counts as an entire month. It would appear as if he said it for the entire 12 months. So if you say even one Kaddish in the 12th month, that would be problematic. Now, the Kaddish period of 11 months is counted from the day of the burial and not from the day of death. Now, this I don't think is true according to Chabad custom. Chabad custom is that because we start saying Kaddish even before the burial, we would stop saying Kaddish a day or two earlier. I could be wrong. I don't remember 100% offhand. Anyway, consequently, according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, if the burial took place on the 11th of Shvat, the mourner stops saying Kaddish on the 10th of Teves because the heavenly judgment begins only after the burial. If it was a leap year, he stopped saying Kaddish on the 9th or the 10th of Kislev. On the day the mourner stopped saying Kaddish, he is entitled to say all the Kaddishim, right? So until now, we've spoken about different degrees of priority in the hierarchy we've had in the 7 days of Shiva, in the month of Shleshim, in the 11th month, or yard site. And now we're adding a fifth person, which we alluded to last week, somebody who's on the last day. You're on the last day, this is your grand finale. You get to kick everybody out of the park and you get all the Kaddishim for yourself. On the day that the mourner stops saying Kaddish, he's entitled to say all the Kaddishim, but a yard site who is present is entitled to one Kaddish, and so is one person in Shleshim, so you give them one Kaddish, but you get all the rest. If there are a number of people observing yard site, the mourners in the Shleshim, he's completely debarred because of them. So there could be a case where a person lucks out and his last day of Kaddish is on the same day that the 7 other people who have yard site, then he'll be left with nothing. If a mourner knows that his, can you still see the screen? If a mourner knows that his father or mother were grave sinners of the category of those who are judged for 12 months, so then he should indeed say Kaddish for the last month. 18. If there are many mourners, may the merciful one not save us. Then in order to avoid quarrels and friction, it is customary in many communities for 2 or 3 mourners to say Kaddish together. And this custom has developed much further than the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, because the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that this is customary in many communities, that if there are many, then 2 or 3 say it together. We do even more than that. We say even if there's not many, even if there's 2, and there's plenty of Kaddishim to go around, that they should each have a few Kaddishim to say, nevertheless, we still say everybody should say all the Kaddishim. So clearly that's a minhag that even though there are some communities, we still have the minhag that only one person says a Kaddish. By and large, both amongst Ashkenazim and Sfardim, the custom has developed into such that everybody says Kaddish together. And like we mentioned last week, it's important to try and say it as much as possible, word for word together. If there's no one in the synagogue mourning the loss of a father or mother, and there's no yard site, so then the mourner's Kaddish should be recited by anyone who has neither a father or a mother. That means somebody who has lost a parent, either one parent, can continue to say Kaddish for other people. And this Kaddish is said for the sake of all the departed people in Israel. Okay, we're not going to go through the whole Sif 19. I'll just point out that there is a letter from the Rebbe which is published in the back of the Tehillim, where the Rebbe also writes how Al-Pi Kabbalah, for the Kabbalah, the Seder of davening, it's important to make sure to have all the Kaddishim said, and that somebody, if there's no mourner, then somebody who doesn't have parents, who has lost a parent, should say, or make sure that all the Kaddishim are said. 20, perhaps a little bit controversial nowadays. A daughter should not say Kaddish at the synagogue. However, some authorities are of the opinion that if a minion assembles at her home, in order that she may say Kaddish there, they may do so. Other authorities hold that even this is not permitted. So nowadays there are many times where you have women who do want to say Kaddish, especially if they don't have any brothers and there's only daughters. And Lamaisa, many Rabbonim, many Poskim, including Moshe Feinstein, allow them to say Kaddish even in the shul. Just they should say it sort of in an undertone. There should be a man saying Kaddish, and they'll say it in an undertone together with the man, so that that's more modest and more appropriate. But and this is something which I've seen many times, even locally here in Chicago. Many women who do want to say Kaddish. If a person, this is an interesting one, if a person observes Yartzeit and is unable to say Kaddish, for example, he is traveling, or there was not enough Kaddishim for everyone, then he may say Kaddish at the Ma'ariv service following the Yartzeit. So the night after the Yartzeit is still associated with the Yartzeit. And finally, the last seif of the chapter. Even though saying Kaddish and prayers are helpful to the souls of the parents, yet they are not the main thing. The most important thing is that the children walk in the path of the righteous, because with that they gain heavenly favor for their parents. Thus, it is written in the Holy Zohar at the end of the portion of the Chukesai, a son honors his father. This statement is similar to the divine command, honor your father and your mother, which teaches that a son must provide for his parents food and drink. All this he must do while they are alive. After the death, you might think that he is exempt. So this is not so. One still has to continue honoring one's parents even after they have passed. Even after the death, it is his duty to honor them even more, for it is written, honor your father. And if the son walks in the path of the evil, he surely shows contempt for his father and disgraces it. But if he walks in the path of the righteous and acts properly, he certainly honors his father thereby. He honors him in this world, in the eyes of man, and confers glory on him in the other world, in the presence of the Holy One, blessed be He. This is borrowing, this is quoting from the Zohar, but it's also similar to what we say in benching, that we should find grace in the eyes of man and also in the eyes of God. And the Holy One, blessed be He, has mercy on him and seats him on his throne of honor. So when the child goes in the righteous way, the soul of his father is seated in the throne of honor. A person should therefore instruct his children to observe one certain mitzvah with particular care. If they fulfill this mitzvah, it counts for more than saying Kaddish. This is also a good course to follow for a person who has no sons, only daughters, that they should choose a mitzvah that they will particularly be careful for. Now, I thought that what it was going to add was that the mitzvah you get from foregoing and allowing somebody else to say the Kaddish or Dam Fil Amid is also a good thing for the neshama. It doesn't say that explicitly, but I've certainly seen that spelled out in other places. Bob, is tonight your father's Yartzeit?
It is.
Oh, how appropriate. So unfortunately, I missed it in shul, but
Don't worry, I didn't.
Chaim, well, you could share here. I could turn off the recording. Maybe you want to share something in honor of your father's Yartzeit quickly? You